Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to do the Elder Scroll IV Oblivion on ARC GPU, from all the Alchemist to the Battle Mage. Welcome to Respawn PC, I'm Doug, let's game on. Starting off with the A310, we get the error message. Sorry, the system does not meet the requirement to play Oblivion. Click OK to proceed to launch, but can run into issue. Video memory, your memory is a 4GB, the game requires 6GB or more. They're talking about VRAM. So the game will launch anyway, even with the 4GB VRAM A310, but you'll see it's quite an issue. Currently playing with my trusty A580 and 32GB of RAM, and the latest Intel driver at 1080p, lowest setting, XeSS enable, and I've tried from ultra quality to performance, and it's not playable. Average FPS vary from 12 to 25 FPS with a lot of stutter. The GPU is pegged at 100% utilization and using 6.2GB of VRAM out of 4. So it's a memory hungry. You go fetch in the RAM to compensate. We're currently using 23GB of RAM out of 32. The system is using the RAM to compensate with the lack of VRAM of the GPU. It is unplayable. Next up we have the A380. This one is a 6GB VRAM card, so we didn't get any warning message when we start the game. But to be able to play the game, you need to have everything at the lowest settings at 1080p, XeSS performance to have an average FPS of 30. That means you have some area you're going to be in the high 20s and some area in the mid 30s to give you this average of 30. So not a perfect 30 FPS average, but you get a little boost when you are in dungeons, reaching a 38 FPS average. The frame time graph is stable in its unstable frame time. It's playable to some extent, probably playable to some people. It is not for me, but you can play. Next up we have still one of my favorite, the A580. The game by default will put all the settings to high, so I left everything at high and I choose XeSS AA. So we're playing at native XeSS and we get quite a decent number. In the open world we are at 35 FPS and in dungeon we reach 52 FPS. This is highly playable. Maybe drop the settings to medium to have a little bit higher than the mid 30 in terms of FPS, but otherwise it's playable at high. And why I said that you should probably drop to medium is because we're using 8.2GB of VRAM. The card is 8GB VRAM, meaning we're using some of the RAM to compensate for the lack of the said VRAM. But the frame time graph is not really or not much affected by the usage of RAM for the VRAM. It's not like the A310 using 2GB more than the existing VRAM. This is only 200MB. We're currently using 16.9GB of RAM out of 32. So if you only have a 16GB of RAM, you may encounter stutter or lower frame rate. It would be a better option to drop the settings to medium. You won't using the entire 8GB of VRAM and you'll be under the 16GB of RAM if that's only what you have. Next up is the A750. This is also a 8GB VRAM card and I kept the same setting as the A580. So we're playing at 1080p high settings and XeSS native. And since both cards not that far from each other that much, I was expecting similar result and I got similar results. I get a lower FPS in the outside at 32 instead of 35, but still in the margin of error. And in dungeon we get a 60 FPS, so we're quite better in dungeon with the A750. But like the A580, the A750 also reach 8.3GB of VRAM. So this 8GB of VRAM will go shuffle in the RAM of the system, bringing our memory to 16.5. So 16GB of RAM to play at high for this game. At least with this card, you encounter some stutter. So drop to medium or have 32GB of RAM. The frame time was smooth and no stutter encounter. It is highly playable. Next up is the A770 8GB variant. Yes, I got my hand on the 8GB variant of the A770. You can watch on the upcoming video how I get it. Anyway, since this is an 8GB card like the A580 and the 750, I kept the same settings. 1080p, high settings, XeSS AA or native. And again, I was expecting similar results to the A580 and the 750. But we do get a little better in FPS. In the outside we are at a 38 FPS average and inside in dungeon we are at a 62 FPS. A little upgrade, as the outside we still reach 8.1GB of VRAM out of 8, so we still go fetch some RAM to compensate. And this time we are under 16GB of RAM. We are at a 15.7, still not enough to have a Windows running in the background, but we are under 16. If you have 16GB of RAM and your Windows is super clean, you'll probably get a similar result as me. Next up, we have again the A770, but this time is the LE, the limited edition from Intel, at a 16GB of VRAM. So now we won't be VRAM bottlenecked, as we have the double of VRAM of the A580, 750, and 770 8GB variant. And it does show a difference, not that much, but still perceptible, as in open world we reach 43 FPS and the VRAM climb up to 9GB of VRAM. But since the card has 16, we don't go shuffle in the system memory, making the gameplay smoother. The frame time is also more smooth. And when you enter a dungeon, now we reach 74 FPS average. That's quite a uplift in performance compared to the A770 8GB variant and lower. Remember when we get the warning that the game cannot play on a lower than 6GB VRAM card? I think even 8GB is a little bit too low. And just because I have the VRAM available for this card, I've tried to ultra settings, XeSS AA or native, still at 1080p, and we get quite a drop. As the outside world we reach now 31 FPS and in dungeon 49 FPS. And this nice 16GB of VRAM didn't help much. We were using a maximum of 9.2GB of VRAM. It is not worth to play at ultra settings. Keep at high settings if you have the A770 LE 16GB variant. Next up, we have one of the cards that everyone is waiting for, the B570. We're still at 1080p. I dropped back to high settings instead of ultra, and XeSS AA or native. And surprisingly enough, we get a similar result as the A770 8GB variant, even though the B570 is a 10GB card. And we do not exceed that 10GB of VRAM on the B570. The highest I went was 8.2GB of VRAM out of 10. So we're not bottlenecked by anything. Beside the GPU peg at 99% of its position, the CPU is okay, and the RAM we're using 15.9 out of 32. In FPS that give us a 36 in the outside world and 66 in dungeon. Compared to the A770 8GB variant, we had 38 FPS in the outside world and 62 in dungeon. The only thing I can say for sure that I felt the difference is the frame time. I have a less drop than the A770. The frame time is more smooth also, so it's only a minimum improvement in the FPS, but it plays way smoother. And finally, we have the B580, the strongest GPU from Intel so far. And if you don't need more than 12GB of VRAM. I've tested at 1080p, high settings, XeSS AA native, and we get an average of 44 FPS in the open world and 81 FPS in dungeon, using up to 9GB of VRAM. Which is okay because the card have 12, like I said. We don't seem to have any kind of a bottleneck, but it seems to be quite the limit of the card. But it probably perform better at 1440p, which would be in another video. Other than that, the card was super smooth, no stutter, no glitches, and the result, the FPS is barely higher than the other card, but it's still higher. I guess this is a plus. In the end, the A310 is unplayable. The A380 is quite a limit. For me, I won't play with the A380. All the other card can play the game easily. You can drop down the settings even more to have more FPS. I prefer higher visual than higher FPS in this kind of game. We also learned that less than 6GB of VRAM is a no-go. At least you get a warning. Play at your own risk. And we're going to have the 1440p with the ARC GPU on the next video of Elder Scroll Oblivion. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one, and subscribe.